Do we really need a Devil Wears Prada sequel? It feels like every other day I see a report that a beloved movie is getting hit with the sequel, prequel, or remake treatment. Practical Magic, American Psycho, Gladiator, Beetlejuice, Freaky Friday. Now, this isn't a totally new phenomenon, but there's no denying that they're becoming increasingly common, and the recent attempts come across as pretty half-baked compared to continuations of the past. Just look at the difference between 1999's The Mummy versus 2017's. Both are based on the original Mummy franchise started in 1932, but one is a hell of a lot better than the other. And no, it isn't the Tom Cruise version. There are of course exceptions to the rule, like Furiosa, but most of the time when Hollywood greenlights these super belated sequels, they come across as cash grabs instead of an actual labor of love. So you can understand my concern when it was announced that a sequel to one of my favorite films, 2006's The Devil Wears Prada, was in the works, and at Disney of all places, who are already on my shit list. According to early reports, the first film's screenwriter, Aline Brosh McKenna, is confirmed to be writing the sequel, and the original director, David Frankel, might be returning as well. Meryl Streep, Emily Blunt, Anne Hathaway, and Stanley Tucci are all in talks to reprise their roles, although based on the proposed storyline published by Puck, they're going to have a very different dynamic. Supposedly, the story will go as such. Amidst the decline of traditional magazine publishing, Miranda Priestley's career has gone into a decline, forcing her to go head-to-head with her ex-assistant, Emily Charlton, now a major executive at a luxury group, whose advertising dollars Miranda desperately needs. By flipping the balance of power, it turns a story that explored gender roles and workplace hierarchies into one about revenge and comeuppance, which is essentially the antithesis of the original film. Although often called a rom-com, The Devil Wears Prada is so much more than that. It's a coming-of-age story, a workplace comedy, and a fantastical fairy tale. It's as entertaining as it is enlightening, and most importantly, it was already perfect. If you asked me what the most influential film of the 21st century was, The Devil Wears Prada would be up there. Now before you roll your eyes and tell me it's actually Iron Man, hear me out. First of all, the film wound up becoming a career turning point for its main cast. Meryl Streep, who was the production's first choice for Miranda Priestley, held her ground and requested double her asking price, saying that their original offer was, quote, not reflective of my actual value to the project. They agreed, and after the film brought in over $300 million against a budget of $40 million, a number many studios would sadly say is disappointing today, it proved that Streep could successfully helm a Hollywood blockbuster, leading her to others like Mamma Mia. The film also introduced the American public to Emily Blunt, who was nominated for a Golden Globe for her snarky portrayal of Emily Charlton. And while I'm sure she would have become a star regardless, there is no denying that The Devil Wears Prada sped up the process, and to this day, it's still the role I associate her with. Although Stanley Tucci had been in a handful of critically acclaimed films like The Terminal and Road to Perdition, he was by no means a star, but his nuanced portrayal of Nigel Kipling was exactly the career boost he needed. Co-star Emily Blunt would later introduce Tucci to her older sister, Felicity, and the couple have now been married for 12 years. So if you're having trouble finding the one, just tell your sibling to become an actor. Up until that point, Anne Hathaway was primarily associated with kid films thanks to starring roles in The Princess Diaries and Ella Enchanted. She had first attempted to transition into adult roles in 2005's Havoc, but the film's subject matter was a bit too controversial for mainstream audiences. Although she showed off her acting chops in Brokeback Mountain, she was hardly a main character, making her next role crucial. The Devil Wears Prada was exactly what she needed, not only highlighting her charisma, but also her commercial appeal, and I'd argue that the film made her a household name. In the 18 years since the film's release, every single member of the core cast has been nominated for an Oscar, and those acting talents are a large part of the magic of The Devil Wears Prada. Obviously, the script and direction are undeniable factors as well, but the actors are the ones who brought those characters to life. We've all met an Andy, an Emily, and a Miranda, and that's what makes the film so relatable. Before Meryl Streep was the ultimate bitchy boss, The Devil Wears Prada was a book. Published in 2003, the story was written by Lauren Weisberger, who a few years earlier just so happened to work at Vogue magazine as editor Anna Wintour's personal assistant. Although Weisberger only held the position for 10 months, it was enough to inspire the direction of her debut novel, which was effectively a semi-fictional account of her experience working for Wintour. The novel soon became a New York Times bestseller, and shortly after, several movies and TV shows centered around the cutthroat magazine industry were put into production, like Ugly Betty and 13 Going on 30. The film rights to The Devil Wears Prada had already been purchased by 20th Century Fox, who snatched it up before it was even completed. At the time, they only had an outline and the first few chapters of the manuscript, but Carla Hacken, former Fox executive vice president, said, quote, "I thought Miranda Priestley was one of the greatest villains ever. I remember we aggressively went in and scooped it up." Once the bestseller was in Fox's hands, they began developing it for film, with several different writers having a go at it. An early version of the screenplay went a classic chick flick route in the same vein as How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, while a different version took notes from Zoolander, going in an over-the-top satirical direction that poked fun at the fashion industry. David Frankel said of this campy direction, quote, "I didn't like the script at all. It was satirical, so as a result, it was unemotional. It was a mean revenge story. I rooted for no one. It wasn't a fun angle into the world. There wasn't one real scene in the movie." Frankel had an immense love for fashion, while eventual screenwriter Aline Brosh McKenna had tried and failed as a journalist. Both of their experiences with those respective industries were reflected in the film, positively and negatively. Yes, they point out the absurdity that exists in the fashion space and the egotism that is often present in publishing, but there's also a sense of deference that comes with it. Case in point, the iconic cerulean scene. Until that moment, Andy had a complete disregard for, even disdain for, high fashion. But as Miranda Priestley brutally points out, it comes from a place of ignorance. The same can be said for much of the general public, whose relationship with fashion begins and ends with the clothes they put on their back. But it's important to remember that clothing doesn't appear out of thin air. Even something that seems simple, like a t-shirt, passes through the hands of dozens of people, and is the product of hundreds of hours of work. There's the cotton farmers, textile workers, clothing designers, pattern makers, and seamstresses, and we haven't even gotten to the post-production stuff yet. Fashion, like many other stereotypically feminine interests, is often treated as frivolous, so I'm forever grateful for a film that actually treats it with the level of respect it deserves. Is a fashion show saving world hunger? No, but neither is football. I also love how effortlessly the film explains the trickle-down effect, which is just as prevalent now as it was 20 years ago. Take, for instance, the bright fuchsia shade that dominated Valentino's Fall-Winter 2022 collection. After the color was worn by dozens of celebrities, it began to make appearances in the collections of other designers, and soon enough, fast fashion companies were duping the look. And by the time the Barbie movie came out in summer 2023, Valentino pink was a mainstream trend. And since we're talking about the trickle-down effect, following the release of the film, Emily's bold eyeshadow and Andy's city chic style eventually became actual fashion trends. Costume designer Patricia Field, who made a name for herself on the set of Sex and the City, even wound up being nominated for an Academy Award, something that is practically unheard of for a category that is usually dominated by period clothing. I'm not totally sold on Field returning for the sequel, considering her recent work on Emily in Paris has practically given me an aneurysm, but no matter who they hire, they'd better bring their A game. The Devil Wears Prada also has a clear understanding of how important Miranda Priestley / Anna Wintour is in the fashion world, which is something a lot of people may not have realized before its release.
You still don't get it, do you? Her opinion is the only one that matters.
Having served as editor-in-chief for American Vogue since 1988, Wintour has been involved in every major fashion moment of the last 4 decades in some capacity. Unsurprisingly, that made the book and the film quite controversial, and they actually had difficulties during production as many designers, journalists, models, and even actors refused to be involved because they were afraid of offending her. While you'd think that would give the production a negative perception of Wintour and prompt them to make Miranda even more of a devil, it was actually the opposite. David Frankel felt that unlike in the novel, Miranda Priestley should be one of the story's main heroines, and as a result wanted to make her sympathetic, not just reviled, saying, quote, "In my view of the world, we should be thrilled to have the people who are excellent at what they do, superior at their jobs. The fact that they aren't always nice is irrelevant." Brosh McKenna mirrored his sentiments, quote, "I had the same idea. taking the world and Miranda Priestley seriously, not trying to spoof the thing. Let's hope they remember that when they're working on the sequel. Instead of a super faithful adaptation of the book, whose third act falls flat, they wanted to focus on the sacrifices people make in order to achieve success, which we see expressed to some degree with every single main character. Surprisingly, executives didn't push for a major romantic subplot, allowing them to focus the conflict between Andy and Miranda, and that relationship is what I consider the heart of the story. Thank God they didn't keep the scene in the book where Andy tells her, "fuck you." Her just leaving without a word is so much more impactful. Considering the first film deviates from the source material a good deal, thankfully getting rid of Andy's alcoholic best friend, it doesn't surprise me that the proposed sequel also seems to be avoiding Weisberger's follow-up novels, which are not great. The first sequel, 2013's Revenge Wears Prada, The Devil Returns, takes place a decade after the first book and follows Andy and Emily, who are now besties, running a high-end wedding magazine, which is so successful that Miranda Priestley wants to acquire it. Andy, who is still traumatized from her time as Miranda's assistant, wants to say no, while Emily is more than ready to sell out. The third book, When Life Gives You Lululemons, was released in 2018 and follows Emily, who now works as a publicist. After a mishap at work, she decides to move in with her friend who lives in an affluent suburb in Connecticut, and the rest of the book is basically if Valley of the Dolls and Gossip Girl had a baby. Although neither book has come close to the first's popularity, The Devil Wears Prada as a whole remains a cultural talking point, with any teeny tiny reference to the film guaranteed to go viral. There was Emily Blunt and Anne Hathaway's Actors on Actors mini reunion, or there was when Alexis Stone transformed into Miranda to attend the Balenciaga fashion show, or Blunt, Hathaway, and Streep's presentation at the SAG Awards, or when Hathaway showed up at New York Fashion Week in a very Andy Sachs outfit and was seated next to Anna Wintour. Not to mention, there's also the Devil Wears Prada musical starring Vanessa Williams as Miranda, which recently premiered on the West End. When The Devil Wears Prada was first released, it was groundbreaking. There's no better evidence of that than its box office numbers, accolades, and lasting legacy, which unfortunately is why I think they're bothering with a sequel at all. Hollywood has always been about turning a profit, but they're currently so obsessed with getting Avengers-level numbers that they're choosing to prioritize pre-existing IP instead of exploring new stories. And I know that nostalgia bait is lucrative, but my God, is it boring. Or maybe I'm just jaded because I've been disappointed more times than I've been impressed. But so far, it seems like a lot of the signs are pointing to this film being a cash grab, especially considering what the cast has said about a sequel in the past.
I heard that there's gonna be a sequel. Would you do the sequel?
No, I don't. They always say there's going to be a sequel.
Always.
There's no sequel.
In a 2021 interview, director David Frankel said, quote, "We had a meeting where we said, what could we do if there was a sequel? We felt like, no, this story has been told." In 2018, Emily Blunt said, quote, "I almost hope it doesn't happen, because I think sometimes when you sequel, everything kind of dilutes how special the original is." And as recently as March 2024, Anne Hathaway said, quote, "I don't think a continuation of that story is probably ever gonna happen. You don't need to worry about a sequel. Let's just keep the thing that we all agree we love." So that's interesting. What are your thoughts on The Devil Wears Prada sequel? We recently launched a free newsletter where we talk about film, fashion, and more. If you're interested in signing up for August's issue, just go to ModernGurlz.com. That's modern, GURLZ.com. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Bye!